Shalom. We are now continuing our discussion of the coloring, the physical coloring, the racial coloring, whatever you want to call it, of the ancient Hebrews, how the Hebrews looked, to some degree, as far as we may ascertain, in ancient times before the exile of the lost 10 tribes. There were 12 tribes of Israel. The 12 tribes of Israel were in the land of Israel. We incidentally are speaking to you from the land of Israel. We are speaking to you from an area close to Bethlehem in the biblical terms where David was born. And we are considering what the Hebrews looked like before they were exiled. And they were exiled in two stages. First the 10 tribes were taken away. Afterwards Judah was taken away. The tribe of Judah returned, retained its identity, its ability to identify itself with the lost 10 tribes, were exiled, and they lost consciousness of who they were. As we said, there were 12 tribes of Israel, but these 12 tribes of Israel had divided, had to split apart, they had separated one from each other, and set up their own independent kingdoms. In the south it was Judah, the kingdom of Judah, and the north it was the kingdom of Israel. The southern kingdom comprised the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and most of Levi, and elements from the other tribes. Whereas the northern kingdom was 10 separate tribes, was 10 tribes, and they were taken away by the Assyrians, and they lost consciousness of who they were. And we have traced and we have found that they are now to be, their descendants are now to be found, and now to be placed amongst Western nations. That is what the Bible says, that is what history says, that is what every field that has something to say on the subject tells us. We have proven it, we have books about it, articles about it, website, clips about it, anything you want. We've done whatever we can to spread this message because this message is important. Not only us, but other people are also, in their own way, have also presented a similar tale, and we have perhaps added to it, adduced additional sources, shown where the sources themselves gave additional evidence confirming these identifications. At all events, we said the lost in tribes, the impression is the lost in tribes before they were exiled, and not only lost in tribes, but all of the tribes basically were similar to the Mediterranean peoples. So the Mediterranean type colouring, their skin was light brown, olive coloured, they had dark hair, dark eyes, perhaps. So there were also a lot, good portion of them also very light coloured skin, and had the red hair, and some of them were blonde, and these elements were quite prominent amongst them. They were not the majority, but they were there, and we can see that when the tribes moved to different areas, environmental influences may have enabled one or other of the different tribes to become more dominant than it otherwise was. And the Bible itself mentions this. Jacob, in the chapter 30 of Genesis, he gives us an example of how environmental influence determines the colouring of animals, and also we may extend this to humans. At all events, getting on to what we're talking about, a previous talk of ours, we discussed what the Bible tells us of how the Israelites looked, what colouring they were. So we'll go through this quickly, and then we'll go on to what the sages say and what the archaeology tells us. So we saw how Laban was the father-in-law of Jacob, who's the father of Leah and Rachel, who together with their maidservants gave rise to the 12 tribes of Israel. So Laban himself is a name, meaning in Hebrew white. Laban means white. Because someone white is somebody that is what he looks like. He looks whitish. Maybe he was an albino, maybe he had very light skin, I don't know. But that was what his name was, and what his name means. And then we have Jacob. Jacob had a twin brother, Esau in Hebrew, modern Hebrew. Esau was described as hairy and reddish, assumedly reddish hair. And so this gene existed amongst the forefathers. And we also have King David. King David is described as having very red hair or golden hair, and he stood out. This is what people noticed about him as soon as they saw him. This was his prominent feature: his red hair, his admoni, this attribute of David. and it was apparently exceptional. So we cannot learn from David, cannot apply the example of David to the whole of the population, but we can use David as a proof that the phenomenon did exist. It was there, it was extant in the population. We also have the Song of Songs written by King Solomon, the Shir HaShirim in Hebrew. Song of Songs describes an encounter or a love story, if we wish to say, between a hero and a heroine. The heroine, the young girl, is described as dark in colour with black hair, and this is emphasised. Darkish of skin. She says it is because the sun has burnt her, and apparently because of this she suffered from prejudices in her own family. She was darker than normal, but at all events she was apparently very beautiful, because that is how she is described. And then we have the hero. The hero is also described as being very white and reddish, as having eyes like doves, implying doves are greyish eyes. Also the heroine, despite being very dark in colour, is also described as having eyes like doves, so apparently she too had eyes that were greyish. He is described as having both golden hair and black hair, and how we reconcile these differences is a question. But we may take it from archaeological evidence shows us that the ancient Egyptians depicted peoples from the area of the land of Israel as having typically black hair and reddish beards or even blonde beards. And this phenomenon existed more than in the past and more than it does at present, but it's still extant, it still is known. So there's the two, maybe how the hero could have golden hair and black hair. At all events, this is what we are told about. We're also told that in the book of Lamentations, Echan Hebrew, the elite section of the Israelites, the elite, the chosen people amongst the society, one could say, are described as having being white as snow. This apparently was considered a desirable feature in those times. We also have archaeology, as we said, archaeology have Egyptian depictions of peoples from this region, from the land of Israel. The Egyptians often depicted people from here, from this area. They depicted them, coloured them. They were known to emphasise the typical characteristics of the foreign peoples, almost to the point of caricature. Peoples from the land of Israel were depicted sometimes as being quite darkish, Mediterranean in type, but also they were also shown as having white skin, sometimes blue eyes or light brown eyes, black, usually, not always, but usually black hair, sometimes red hair, and along with this blackish hair, they also had light brown or reddish beards, and sometimes blonde beards. Sometimes they were also depicted as being blonde. So, and at other times, some of them we have seen pictures of them depicted as having red hair. Also, the people of the land of Israel were associated with the Hyksos, who had once ruled over Egypt. We identify, we believe the Hyksos were part, or the ancient Hebrews who had lived in the land of Egypt before coming out of Egypt, before coming into the land of Canaan, had been part of the Hyksos complex, as if to say, Hyksos civilization, have given rise to it. Doesn't really matter, that is a different subject. The point is that in Egyptian eyes, in ancient Egyptian eyes, the people of the land of Israel were identified with the Hyksos, was once ruled over them, and have later been driven out of Egypt according to them, and they identified Hyksos with the god Set, who was an anti-hero in their mythology, and this god Set was depicted as having had red hair, and people from this region were therefore also considered to have typically red hair. That is worth noting. We also have Libyans, so-called Libyans. If you look in books on archaeology, you see pictures of Libyans having white skin and being fairish in colour. And Alexander Nibi, she was an archaeologist from Italy, but she lived in Australia. So she wrote an important book in 1986, Lapwings, Libyans in Ancient Egypt, proving that the so-called Libyans in Egyptian depictions were actually Israelites, and she identifies them with the tribe of Reuben. Instead of Lebo, the Egyptian word may be read as Rebu, which she attributes to the tribe of Reuben. So there still is proof in the same direction we are speaking of. We also should mention that the 12 tribes of Israel, and there weren't that many women about who were suitable to them. According to one source, most of the tribes, when they were born with a twin sister, and so the twin sister would marry one of her half-brothers. Such marriages were permitted at that time, so they more or less kept it in the family. Other sources say that the different tribes married to different people from the surrounding areas, each one married to someone from another country. This way you would have got a mixture of peoples and a mixture of physical characteristics amongst the Israelite nations. Should be mentioned, the Bible itself says that Joseph married an Egyptian woman, Genesis 41:4-5. Machir, the son of Manasseh, the son of Joseph, he is described as having had an Aramean concubine, 1 Chronicles 7:14. Judah had one Canaanite wife, Genesis 38:5, and one Semite wife named Tamar, from whom he begat Zerah and Peretz, Genesis 38:28-30. Also, one of the sons of Simeon had 7 sons. One of his sons was from Canaanite women. So we had a mixture, even according to the Bible, and the Midrashim and later sources add to the sources suggesting that quite a mixture took place. For instance, we have the Sefer Adurot and Sefer Yashar, and we have the Book of Jubilees, and they all mention the tribal heads taking women from all over the place, Canaanite, Egyptian, Elamite, whatever you want, they're all in there. As we said, we have in the biblical account, the Bible in Leviticus 13 describes the case of leprosy, and in the case of leprosy, which was a literal, a religious spiritual affliction, had spiritual causes which gave but physical manifestations. It is assumed there that the typical colouring of the Hebrews would be black, would have black hair and tanned skin, one could say. So this has to be examined, and we will examine it more, but this still has to be kept in mind. So the sages, basing themselves on this source in Leviticus 13, said that the Israelites, the Hebrews, typically are not like white like a Germani, and not black like a Cushi, like a Negro, but intermediate in between. That is found in the Mishnah. Negayim 2-1. On the other hand, we have a Midrash, Genesis Rabbah 86:3, which says that Joseph was like a Germani. A Germani in Midrashic terminology, that was before the present nation of Germany even existed, but there were peoples in that area, in the geographical area known as Germany. And this term applied to people from the far north, people from the area of Scandinavia, people from Northern Europe who looked very white. And according to this Midrash, Joseph looked like one of them, which is interesting, worth noting. And Joseph was also described as having a face that was pink like a rose and being the image of his father, whereas it is implied the other brothers did not necessarily look the same as Jacob did. We also have a Midrash, Genesis Rabbah 98:5, says that amongst the tribes of Simeon and Levi, there were many Bohakanim. Bohakanim means people very light-skinned, almost albinoid, red-haired or blonde-haired, and this is described as to their detriment. Apparently, it was not considered desirable to look that white or that light. And seeing someone who lives in this area can understand why, because the climate is not so friendly towards people who have very light skins. But people with very light skins did exist. So we have different sources pointing in different directions, but the overall conclusion must be that the ancient Israelites, ancient Hebrews, did look like Western Europeans, or people similar to Western Europeans would have been found amongst them, and taking account of different environmental influences and genetic drift and so on, it is easy to see how they gave rise to West European peoples. And we should also notice that we are sometimes misled by stereotypes. We, for some reason, tend to think of all the people, many of the people in Western Europe as being typically Caucasoid, Nordic, and statistically this is not so. I'm not talking about the immigrants who have come to these nations from Italy, from Greece, from Russia, from Asia, from Africa, and from all over, and have intermixed with them. I'm talking about them as they always were from the time that they came out of the British Isles, they came out of Western Europe. They were already, at least in 50% of the cases, at least half of the cases, are Mediterranean type, with an admixture of Nordic peoples, which is not that much different from the perception that we gain from the sources concerning how the Hebrews looked or were when they were still in the land of Israel. May the Lord God of Israel bless you. Thank you.